There we go. Hello, everyone. What's up, world? Happy Wednesday afternoon. We are doing this, the first and the earliest podcast we've ever done on the Chiropractic Compass podcast, brought to you by the legendary Chiropractor online community. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for watching, rewatching, whatever it might be. We are here today with Dr. Janice Hughes, who has been around the profession for a very long time and is so wise and is going to bring so much value and content to this podcast that you are not going to want to miss out. And if you do, you can always rewatch it. So with that being said, Dr. Janice is out in Boulder, Colorado with her family, and she is crushing life in all the factors of life, you know, financial freedom, practice freedom, coaching, consulting, management freedom. I mean, you name the freedom, Dr. Janice has it. So with that being said, Doc, I would love for you to share with the audience a little bit about your background, your accolades, and how you really got into this profession and what it's given you so far.
Oh, I mean that's wide open. So I'll do a little like intro, and then you can either ask questions or
Perfect.
We can take it wherever
Let's
you
do
need
it.
to. I love the piece where, you know, you said there by the end, you know, like how I got into chiropractic or where this all started, you know, and you politely talk about experience, but I'm at 29 years since graduation now. So 2020 is my 30-year, anniversary. But it's interesting. I always tease that in many ways, I took the slow boat to China, where my original degree is microbiology. So I'm a kind of a science head. And then I got accepted into medical school. Kind of was that very traditional, well, here's what you do. You know, if you're interested in health or if you're interested in kind of medicine, well, then you apply to medical school. And yet, luckily, I kind of had an intuitive sense that I just didn't know that was right. And so I deferred my acceptance and went to the institution that if I was going to go to medical school, that's where I was choosing. But I did a master's in somatic cell genetics.
Wow.
And I love talking about that because a lot of you, like students, young practitioners, you know, listening, that it's kind of like an interesting thing that I for a long time just said, oh, I'm a chiropractor, but recognizing that some of the things I've done later in my career really come back to as a somatic cell genetics student, you know, focusing on a master's degree. I was doing a lot of things like in the medical field way before there kind of was an understanding of vitalism, chiropractic vitalism. And so what we were doing is my supervisor was looking at why people became resistant to some of the early drugs for chemotherapy, because we knew the body had an innate wisdom. And so how could you blast and use a drug and get a good result, but then the body created that resistance to the drug, or the drug was so harsh on people. So I talked this morning just a little bit about that, because that's what I love, that we all find really weird ways to get into chiropractic. And like I'm doing all of that, and then it turns out that while I was doing all that, my dad was going to a chiropractor. They even took my younger sister to a chiropractor, you know, for some headache symptoms, but I knew nothing about it.
Yeah. And
like it was only that I then hurt myself, and all of those medical people and these brilliant scientists that I worked with, you know, everybody's like, well, you know, you need bed rest. And none of that made any sense. And so I like to describe that chiropractic chose me.
Absolutely.
I knew nothing about it, you know, but also the chiropractor that my dad sent me to, because I was back near the town. He knew a chiropractor that he had seen at one point in that town. And it was interesting because that chiropractor, within 3 visits, I just had a rib subluxation. And so obviously within 3 visits, I was about 75 or 80% better. And on the 3rd visit, that chiropractor said to me, well, with all your education, you should become a chiropractor. And, you know, it was just like a kind of this intuitive light bulb went off. And, you know, when I got into chiropractic in the school I went to in Canada, because of being Canadian, I was, of course, very accepted, you know, because I had a master's degree. I could have taught some of the early basic science courses in chiropractic school. Not that I would ever want to, but through all of that, it was so interesting. I came in an era that, chiropractic was looking for so much medical acceptance, which I think is why I got in. I got into a very difficult school with ease because of that. So, all long story short, obviously the listeners can see I'm a chiropractor. Was originally an associate for a couple of years. I'd like to talk about, I chose associateship because I thought there were some real benefits in it. And there were, but then some of those benefits weren't, say, fulfilled because of the leadership in the clinic I was in. So my personality, I was then just destined to go out and do it on my own.
Yeah.
So I think that, and maybe that can be a bit of our conversation. How do we help more students or young practitioners get really clear on what's the right fit for them? And also the business model. I learned a lot about the business of being an associate and or then eventually hiring associates. I knew nothing about business. And, it's interesting. I've got up on my screen kind of a survey, these surveys that I've started to do coming back and teaching at Life University. And the thing that everybody talks about missing, and it's things like stronger business planning, like marketing, networking, coaching, mentoring, how to run a business, how to speak in the community versus to other chiropractors. So, I'm just reading off what that was maybe the top 6 things that students about to graduate keep telling me like we need more of.
Right.
So, part of the years of experience is I learned from all my own mistakes. So I don't talk to like you as a about to be doc or to a young doc and say, well, I knew it or I figured it out all along or I just ran the most incredible practice. I ran a practice that I always describe, it's like I succeeded in spite of myself.
Right.
I made a lot of mistakes. Now, I learned, and then also when I was out in practice, I personally trained as a professional coach. I wanted to understand the concept of coaching because I built a lot of things into my practice years before it was sort of vogue to talk wellness. I was trying to build that in. I knew that I needed to understand how to coach people. Yeah. So then, I transitioned my practice. My personality, I was just destined to do some other things in the profession. But as I sold my practice to an amazing chiropractor, I literally then began to coach chiropractors. So I come to your podcast this morning, like I've also coached thousands of chiropractors.
Yeah.
And, then the same thing, 7-8 years later, I cycled into a biotech startup. So from that perspective, I'd like to talk to a lot of seasoned chiropractors about something very different. It's so, different for you to hear this idea of how you exit practice because you're not in practice yet. But, so that's a long-winded, kind of little couple of highlights along the way of why I come now with a lot of really different experience because I've kind of seen lots of facets of business.
Absolutely, Doc. Thank you so much for sharing. I love hearing people's chiropractic stories. Yours is unique, and it always goes back to chiropractic somehow finding us and choosing us, right? It's pretty amazing. But we will speak. I wrote down associateship. If we don't get to it, remind me at the end, and we'll talk about associating and like why that's so important, and why it was a vital role for you, and how it made you realize like, hey, I had to go out on my own, kind of thing. And I think that I wrote down and starred that the deferment of medical school acceptance was your catalyst to chiropractic.
Yeah.
So that's pretty cool. So without further ado, I want to bullet point the topics that we're going to discuss today, and then we're going to hop right into just question and answer, or conversational based interview kind of style.
Great.
And so with that being said, we're going to talk about the 3 stages of practice. And Dr. Janice mentioned this just at the end of her introduction of, we really don't, as a seasoned doc, you don't really think about an exit strategy, or as a young doc or soon to be doc like myself, the light's not even on for the practice yet. So to think about that is going to be a really interesting perspective. So we're going to start by talking about the startup, how you get into the practice, how you open it, what should you do, and maybe we can sprinkle in associating in there as well. Moving from striving to thriving. So I'm assuming those are, the glory years of practice and really understanding what you're doing for your community. And then that 10-year exit strategy. So getting back out into maybe a different hobby, maybe life coaching, maybe giving back to the profession in different facets and different ways. So, Doc, thank you so much for those amazing topics. Let's hop right into them. Let's talk about the startup of practice. How, as myself, if I were to go associate or open up, let's talk about both, but let's break them down.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting. Those 3 phases are just what I made up. So I don't want you to think that it has to be, okay, well, it's only as a DC to B that you're in startup. Somebody listening could be, 8 years into practice and be moving to another place and you're back in startup.
Yeah.
I can show you some people that marry another chiropractor, move to a different area, and then they want to practice together. They're now in startup. So coming from the business world, I like to call it those 3 categories. And even, yes, it sounds like this idea of a 10-year exit strategy or even thinking exit when you haven't even entered is crazy. But I want you to understand that why I have really kind of categorized or labeled these 3 categories is because I think then you can take any topic. You can take money and the things and fears and questions or challenges about money, they're there at every one of those. Yeah. And I don't say 10-year exit because it also means that you have to leave practice. Right. More and more, I believe that I'm called to work with some chiropractors who are in a good practice or a good model. And if they now earlier started thinking about an exit strategy, that's just called financial freedom.
Right.
And that's called maybe a model that, is more business-like. Mm-hmm. So how do you over, say, 10 years position yourself so you have unbelievable freedoms? So, as we even talk startup, I just want you to see that the clearer we can have you at least understand there's several categories, and they're just Janice's made up categories. But there will be sort of different facets of your career. And so maybe starting now as a DC to B, you think about, okay, well, startup, where do I even focus on that? Is that just once I cross the graduation stage? Or my hope is a lot of you will now start thinking about it by 7th and 8th quarter, so that you're designing the practice now, but that will still, startup is still probably for your first couple of years. Although it's interesting, and to give people some inspiration, there's a couple that I have been mentoring / coaching that are only 6 months into practice. He's a Life U grad, and for their 6-month anniversary, they basically topped 500 people a week that they just saw. Awesome. And so now that unfortunately that's not the norm, but right. That's a Life U grad.
Yeah.
And that is what's feasible. So now, though, that doesn't mean they've arrived. They'll still be in this startup mode for probably the next couple of years. Mm-hmm. So I think just as we want to talk startup, there's a lot of factors like, what phase is that? Some of you, you're at a phase, like by you doing these podcasts, you're learning business principles. You're learning, again, hearing different people's perspective. Like very selfishly, it's really great for you.
Yeah.
So you're in startup mode already,
yeah.
Even though you've got all these crazy exams and boards and all those kinds of things, but now I know some others that I've met that they're already several months after graduation and they're still not really clear what they want to do. Mm-hmm. That's a challenge, yeah. Because the reality is, any of you graduating are on average about $240,000 in debt. That's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
I'm one.
If we're not careful, like that's influencing the way we even think about care plans or think about seeing patients. A lot of you are in student clinics where, I keep talking to people about how can you even treat student clinic like you're practicing.
Yeah.
And I guess I only know that, like, and I understand there's rules. As a student, I just figured out a way to break all the rules or to work within those confines.
Yeah.
You know, just as an example, like I really knew which clinicians were going to help me be more effective in the way I saw the patient, did the paperwork. I get that we kill a lot of trees and we still have paper, and then some of it's on the computer. And so there's a lot of stuff. But guess what? There's always going to be a lot of stuff. Like even if you're out in your own practice, you're going to have to figure out the system for all that note taking. So now early, treat student clinic, treat like main clinic, like you're practicing.
Yeah.
You know, as a student, because I'm going to keep coming back to this, like, I guess I just knew I'd taken enough years, and I was like all of you. I was as debt loaded back then as you are. And my husband's a chiropractor, and he was as debt loaded. So between the two of us, it was insane. But a lot of the things I did as a student were preparing me.
Yeah.
So when I was in a patient in student clinic, I chose which intern I was going to follow around.
Yeah.
And I then groomed and talked and spent extra time in the clinic with the intern that I was eventually going to take over all of his patients. And so because everybody saw me around, so many of the clinicians very early already kept saying like, wow, you've been here for a long time, you know, and so, or these patients, you know, why don't you take over them? Like, so, you know, there was also an urgency for me by the time I hit student, like, or main clinic. I actually had my oldest son while I was interning, and I knew that you never know what happens after labor and delivery. And so I wanted my numbers to be done.
Right.
I wanted to be done and dusted before I had my oldest son. And, you know, so like almost like a sense of urgency for all of you now, like even just realizing if you walk away from what we're talking about and realize that you're already in startup, how can you take it seriously? How can you make your business plan real?
Yeah.
I've looked at some of the business plans that they're just not real, you know, and you don't even know how would I generate those numbers. It's great to put like in a little Excel spreadsheet and say, well, this many new patients and this is what it looks like. But it's really, how would you do that? And so can you treat it that seriously even now as a student because you're already in startup mode?
Right. Absolutely. And I want to mention, I was just jotting this down actually, if you're a chiropractic student or if you're in chiropractic school, and Dr. Janice said she wants, you know, even earlier, 7th, 8th quarter, starting to get that really startup mentality going. And I want to urge people to understand that I've had a couple people reach out to me on Instagram and Facebook who are actually going to chiropractic school starting, you know, in the fall, in the spring, in the summer, whatever quarter or try they're going to start in. And they're like, hey, you know, is your mentor program for us? Or is this program for us? Or what's a good place to live around Life University? And, you know, that's really cool because that to me is like startup mode for the student, right? So the prospective students out there who are looking to go to chiropractic school, who are getting ready to go to chiropractic school, don't feel as if you don't have this startup mentality also. It's just a little bit different of a framework because you're going into student mindset versus possibly doctor mindset, right?
Yeah, but create a plan.
Right, yeah.
You know, and that's no different than somebody listening might already be 6 months or 12 months into practice. And, you know, for every one of you, create a plan for the next piece. You know, in a lot of the business work I do, in the business coaching and executive coaching, I really talk about a G curve. And what I mean by that is your growth curve. So, you know, right now, somebody listening that you're describing is coming to life, you know, so you're going to create your growth curve for while you're in your first couple of years.
Yeah.
You know, for some of you that are in mid-career as a student, now, how do you begin to see past graduation? Like if we could even instill in people that they start looking, maybe not to have it all figured out, but, oh, like, here's where I'd love to live, or here's the life and the business I'd love to design. Yeah. You know, seeing beyond that graduation stage. Some of you that are in early setup of your clinics, a lot of times we're doing really reactionary things, versus what's my first growth curve? What is my first business growth curve going to be?
Yeah.
So kind of going out and in startup mode in a biotech, it's almost like my job was to raise money, to keep our doors open and pay our consultants. And it's like I had to be thinking a little further ahead than where we were right now.
Yeah.
And luckily we had science people focusing on where we were right now, but that wasn't my role, and I think so often, as a student, coming into school or in school or just graduating, we're often like just focused on what's right in front of us. Mm-hmm. And the what's right in front of you as a student isn't going to create your success in practice.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's very true. The G curve, I love that. I absolutely love that. Your growth curve. And I'm going to relate that back to something a marketing professor that we have at Life University mentioned. And he said he asked the class, what's the percentage of the population that uses chiropractic services? And people, 10 to 15%, right? Somewhere around there. And so he was like, you have a 90% growth potential in the field of chiropractic. Everybody should succeed. He's like, everybody should succeed. The population is too big for the amount of chiropractors who are graduating to take care of everybody. So
absolutely.
So with that being said, we need more chiropractors. We always say that. But the growth potential, to go back to that G curve, you can always look at that and think positively about it, because it's not a scary thing. As a chiropractic student or a doctor out there, if you're 40 years into practice, 2 years into practice, the growth is inevitable. It's just how are you going to get there the fastest, right?
Yeah. I've been doing a really interesting course. I think there's a lot that chiropractic could do to step into a new role in the public health arena. And so I've been taking a course on the sociology of inequities in health.
Interesting.
And looking at all the non-served populations, we know, not only do we know that the medical system has some real failures. I mean, obviously, if I need an emergency service, that's the first place I'm going, but for so many reasons, we know that system has these big gaps and interesting, unique gaps that we fit right into. Yeah. And I'll even just give the whole opioid issue, that I see such a rightful place for chiropractors. I am so vitalistic, but to stop also being afraid of identifying the fact that the reason there is the opioid crisis is because people had back pain, neck pain, physical pain. Over 50% of the population today has some level of pain.
Yeah.
So I don't mean that we just all go and we start to mark to that, but could we step into our rightful place to educate people about alternatives to that?
Right. Right.
And one alternative that nobody's talking about is the power of chiropractic. So you're right. There is so much growth opportunity within this country, internationally. Mm-hmm. I mean, the numbers are even smaller, internationally, of how many of their populations are under chiropractic. So the growth curve is unlimited for chiropractic. Mm-hmm. Each of you in startup, your potential growth is unlimited. But how do you then start to figure out what are some actions? From a business perspective, if you want to look at where you'd love to be at the end of the year, I always like to now break that back down into, well, what does that mean for each quarter?
Right.
So it's interesting that even your classes are based on a quarter, but maybe instead of thinking only about this quarter, could you plot out 12 months and 18 months, which is where you're going to be in your own practice?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So that doesn't mean you still don't have goals for this quarter, but, could we even help some of you open up to even one action or one course or one lecture that's going to start to talk about the business of your practice, so that it helps give you perspective for the courses you're taking, but you're already then thinking further ahead than you typically have been thinking.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and a really great point for students and even docs out there who are putting themselves on that quarter system for their fiscal years and everything like that. Because, I think the bottom line here is that growth is unlimited. You just have to be able to tap into it and get your mindset right in order to do that, right? So put yourself in the right spot. Let's go in now, Dr. Janice. Let's go into the second stage of practice building, essentially, is going from striving to thriving. Because we mentioned, $240,000 worth of debt that most students are coming out with. That, to me, is striving to succeed. If you take that, how do you thrive with that? The debt lingering. Where are you going to practice? How are you going to get patients in the door? Who are you going to see? Let's talk about it all.
Yeah. It is such a unique page, in this whole story because there are so many mindset pieces related to the concept of thriving, or I like to talk about abundance. Or one of the things that I did is years ago, I created a program called the 28 Laws of Chiropractic Attractability, and focusing on attraction versus what's happening even in those early years or when you're striving and trying to figure out how to pay debt. Like there's so many of these things right in front of you that are stressful. Mm-hmm. So some of it is mindset and how you do some work around your mindset. But then there are the physical things that get missed a lot. The physical things like building care plans or systems. I see a lot of chiropractors, there is an average PVA for our profession tends to be around 8 visits. Almost like student clinic, you see them and then there's probably no discussion of, what else chiropractic does in their life. And so is such a need for learning in this, striving to thriving, how to not just be flying by the seat of your pants, to build business systems systems that are very sustainable, things that help with the education, with your PVA, to build business systems in, how do you build financial learning and systems in, how do you decide what to do with all of your dollars? What happens is sometimes in that striving to thriving, you're doing well, or you feel, oh, this is good.
Yeah.
But the challenge is good is the kiss of death of great.
I like
because that if you don't grow, if you don't keep in mind these business growth curves and life growth curves, what starts to happen is you're going to stay in that striving or treadmill versus building in systems and opportunities, so that you can pay down debt, and it's very feasible. I can show you some people that get that debt paid off in 2 or 3 years or 5 years, but now that takes some financial systems and real savviness, and listening to others, versus one of the things that, I just have a perspective on all of the, sort of debt reduction tied to your actual numbers or growth or debt forgiveness. Mm-hmm. What happens is, it's almost how do you embrace, remember I said a piece of this is mindset. How do you embrace that you don't even get the opportunity to do this amazing thing called chiropractic if you needed that debt and had to create that to get this degree? How do we embrace it? Mm-hmm. How are we so thankful for it? And, income-based debt reduction, that attitude starts to stagnate your growth.
Yeah.
Starts to stagnate what you can do, because it's well, if I stay here, then I don't have to pay as much out. So that's an interesting one. And I'm not here to make a judgment of do this or don't do this, because I think there's always going to be the odd situation where that may be helpful, but a lot of times it stagnates you.
Right.
And so, again, then this idea of like turning away, or, I know some people who then want to file bankruptcy so that they don't have to deal with all that debt. It's kind of an energetic thing, that how can you embrace and figure out the ways to do so well that you have all that debt paid off in no time.
Yeah. And Dr. Kim also talks about that, because you're with the group to inspire women, and I don't know if we mentioned that already or not, but it's a coaching and help group, support group for women chiropractors who want more out of chiropractic in their careers. And Dr. Janice, Dr. Shaylin, and Dr. Kim Carpenter all head that organization. It's a phenomenal org. And if you're a female chiropractor or even a male chiropractor, check it out. It's phenomenal. They do coaching calls all the time, and they're free. What better for students?
Absolutely.
But with that being said, Dr. Kim talks about creating that wealth while paying down debt, right? So like having the mindset of like, hey, I am successful. I am going to be successful. Now, how can I take what I've earned and start chunking away at this debt even more than just sitting on it and, worrying about my income-based debt and all this other, the interest and all this other stuff that goes into it. I think that what you said pretty much encompasses all of that, is paying down debt while creating wealth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's one of the things, I was just at Life, not quite 2 weeks ago, for the Connections program. And one of the things, I left them sort of with some secrets, some money secrets, because I was talking about abundance and that idea of wealth creation. And, early in my career, I realized that if I could create a formula for myself, a formula that was about how did I deal with debt while I also built wealth. Mm-hmm. And not waiting. So too many people will talk about, it's only about the debt, focus on the debt, get that chunked out. So if all you focus on is debt, I like to talk about how thoughts become things. Yep. So you think debt, you talk about debt, you plan debt, you're going to get more debt and more energy that's kind of all about that striving. Yeah. Whereas if you can, at least for a few minutes a day or a little opportunity, be thinking abundance, be thinking opportunities, then all of a sudden, things begin to tip the scales over there. So, I tease a lot. Let's face it. Where's that extra, $100 a month go? But probably to a little bit of blowing off steam, or doing something fun. And so by the end of the month, it's usually pretty bare bones for people. Yeah. If you could start to think about, even now as a student, instead of, only thinking about debt, focusing on debt, starting to create some attitudes of wealth or actions towards wealth. Years ago, I worked with a group of senior students, and I basically challenged them all to start saving $100 a month. Just put it in a money market fund, put it in a savings account, whatever, and that's not where you're going to build wealth, but you start to feel differently if all of a sudden you're putting a little bit of emphasis on wealth. Yeah. So young in my career, once I had my basic nut figured out, how much did it take me to run my life and run my practice? So that's the number that I needed to head to target. Mm-hmm. Well, beyond that, what was I going to do with every dollar and every $100 and every $1,000? And I started to plan it out. Mm-hmm. And I had an amazing coach early in my career, and he really talked to me about, where would you put those dollars? What would you do with those? So when I say come up with your formula, I came up with a 50-50 formula. That for every extra $100 or every extra $1,000, 50% was going to go to debt and 50% was going to go to wealth building. So that it wasn't always, like some people, you may know that if you could get that debt chunked out even faster, that you'll feel so different about it. Well, I still don't suggest you do 100%, but maybe you're doing 80% debt, 20% into something future oriented.
Right.
So that if we at least start to put a little bit of energy to that, or create some affirmations, or think about this idea of abundance, like you start to see that begins to balance things out.
Yeah.
But yeah, money and the debt piece is a reality.
It's a tough reality for a lot of people, but it's something that you can approach, and we've talked about it on this podcast and now with you a couple times, is you can approach it differently, and that is what we urge people to do. Chiropractic student, chiropractor out there, no matter what you are, if you are involved in the chiropractic profession and any sort of money advice that comes from this podcast is pretty beneficial. So take it for what it's worth, apply it to your practice, apply it to your life, and start to see changes, because change your mindset and change your life. And that's what we always say in chiropractic. So,
right. And I think what I could do, Johnny, is I'll make sure you have like our free resource, which is just like almost like a little ebook primer about money, and it's not oh, here's money and here's every detail about it. There's a bunch of fabulous affirmations in it about abundance thinking, about like how to shift that mindset. So I'll make sure that we show that link, or I can post it.
Do you know the link off the top of your head?
Yeah, it's so it's the number 2inspirewomen.com/money.
Okay, cool. I'll post it in the comments right now.
Yeah, it's a free, it's just an ebook. So again, plug in email, get that ebook. We don't like use your email and throw it all over the place. It's just because we only want people who are very serious about this as well.
Yeah.
And then happily, the more we can come up with down the road, say some other money resources, we could then expose that to people too.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Doc. I appreciate you giving back to the profession. And last but not least, let's talk now that we're thriving. We went from startup, our mindset was right, we got it, we nailed it. No matter if we're a student or a doctor out there, 40 years, 2 years, doesn't matter. Now we went from striving to thriving. We were like, oh man, we got debt, $240,000. Crap, what am I going to do? How am I going to help people? But now we're thriving. We're building wealth. We're accumulating money to not only give back to ourselves, but the profession, to our practice, to our community, and things that really matter to us. Now let's talk about the 10-year exit strategy. And I know you said at the beginning of this podcast that you don't necessarily it doesn't need to be an exit, right? It doesn't need to be that harsh word of exit, get out, whatever. It's now taking your mindset from startup and taking it to how can I reevaluate my mindset, reevaluate my life, and look at, I've helped this many people. How can I help other people in another way in this profession? Go ahead and speak on that a little bit, Doc.
Sure. Why I think this is a really critical piece for our entire profession is because as I went out into a biotech startup, part of it is I knew thousands of chiropractors, and our biotech is based on creating an enzymatic approach to treating children with autism. Pretty aligned with chiropractic.
Yeah.
So thinking that I knew so many chiropractors, I could talk to them. I'm raising money. I'm beginning to create that energy around this company and taking it from idea into a business. And what I found is, number one, chiropractors couldn't afford to invest in us or had no idea the concept of investing in vitalistic or congruent businesses and companies. And so I think that this is what really began to create this third category for me as a coach looking at our profession. I think what happens as people begin to thrive, I think many of them don't know what to do with their money, or are doing things that are quite risky or that they don't understand, or really I see that a lot of people just give the reins over to someone else. Somebody else is making those decisions versus teaching you how to make those decisions. Right. So I think even in thriving, we have some chiropractors doing really, really well, and yet I want you to understand that in many cases they're now dependent on that cash flow, or they don't have other facets of their business, or they're kind of like on this treadmill and they haven't created a business exit plan. And then we see that a lot of times practices are being sold for like half an X. Like a lot of people are saying, well, it's not this unbelievable asset. And that is just wrong. Like this is for many chiropractors, this is your life work. Is your business now set up for a sale, set up for this exit strategy? Mm-hmm. And then this is where the associate piece comes in again, because literally some phenomenal exit opportunities are to look at this idea of an associateship differently. So let me give you a concrete example of this. An amazing chiropractor that I've known for years. He had associates, and then all of a sudden it was, how did he shift his mindset, or how did we work with him to grow to look for a different kind of associate? Mm-hmm. Someone he was hopefully going to be able to groom to purchase that practice. Now, that being said, a lot of you aren't ready for that kind of associateship, that you have so much learning to do that, again, nobody's going to offer you that right away. They're still going to offer you a 1 or 2 year contract. But he now knew we could help him define the different way to look for an associate, right, and the way to groom and train that associate. Because associates are so often treated no different than how our profession treats CAs. And here's where Dr. Shaylin's expertise with how to hire an amazing CA and how to lead them and how to groom them. Because in chiropractic, we often hire great people and then it's like we leave you to your own training. We're not leading you. And so taking this chiropractor and shifting his mindset and strategies about how he hired his associate, and that associate was now on a 2-year agreement with great incentives built in. But then that young man really quickly realized he was being groomed, and within 5 years, he was a partner within that practice. Awesome. And literally then they worked for another 5 years to, the senior doc was thinking, well, I'm done now. And yet he wasn't ready to retire. And so we were able to help him. They now have brought in and are looking for the next right associate to begin that grooming process, so that by the time the senior doc leaves and the original associate in this new model has purchased, is full owner, then literally he's already grooming someone else. And so now suddenly you have a business asset. Mm-hmm. Versus, well, now some of you are being told you can go out and buy a practice for, 30 cents on the dollar. That someone asking too much for their practice, is just trying to take advantage. So we have so many mix-ups in this 10-year exit strategy idea. So that's just why I've been talking more about it now the last couple of years that I've kind of cycled back to chiropractic. And, this is really where I think there's a lot of power that our profession can really grow more. Absolutely. And I think that it's important, I know actually that it's important to not only, you have that mindset component as we always do, with like, okay, what am I going to do next though, right? And now you have to start looking at that G curve, but now later in your life and later in your practice or whatever you're doing to make that happen for you and make your future a reality. And it's got to be, I think, like what you were saying with all of this, it's got to be a well-oiled machine. You can't be relying on, that constant cash flow of you doing everything, every single piece of work, and all of the, internal stuff when it comes to that practice, because then when you are ready to go or do something else or aim your energy towards something else and maybe go part-time in your practice, you can't do that because you're like, oh crap, I don't have anyone to take over for me. I'm the only one that knows how to do anything. Well, and it might unfortunately be sooner than that. Yeah. Like I ended up where I had pneumonia. And I ran a high volume, big practice, had an associate there, and yet literally I was going to handle this pneumonia naturally. And so that takes some work, and nobody wanted me at the clinic, adjusting. Yep. But in 5 weeks, that associate had spiraled my practice down. Mm. And now that was nobody's fault but my own.
Right.
So part of it is because we are often fee for service or provide the care and then there's those rewards or there's those billings. Like this is about a lot more, Johnny, than even thinking in terms of, can I, retire or right. Could I take more time off? Also, what happens, you're in this fee for service industry, what happens if you can't deliver that? And so I think that like the idea that if we could even have more chiropractors sooner in their career thinking about at least building in systems or plans, or for a lot of young women in the profession, how do you build in maternity plans if you're going to have a family? Mm-hmm. I had nothing, early in my career. And remember, I had my oldest son while I was in school.
You didn't have a plan? You didn't have a maternity leave plan in school?
I had no plan in place. And so then even with my middle son, I was bringing a cover doctor in, but again, like, so how do we help more of you sooner is and really not that you're going to leave practice, but could you build a better business and business systems sooner in your career for if anything happens, and or that you do have more freedom and flexibility early.
Right. Absolutely, Doc. I absolutely love these 3 stages of your practice. I took 2 pages of notes already, so there's that. I'll probably take more when I go back and rewatch this podcast. But I want to say something to you because, thank you for being on this show. Thank you for sharing your wisdom, your expertise with us about these 3 stages of practice. And I want to give you the opportunity to have people reach out to you. What is the best way for people to get in touch with you if they're a doc 40 years, 2 years out, if they're a chiropractic student just starting, or even in chiropractic school, no matter what quarter? How do they what's the best way for people to reach out to you?
Yeah, there's a number of ways. So my email is very simple. It's just Dr. Janice at toinspirewomen.com. And that's a really easy, fast way to get a hold of me. Or the other thing is, through To Inspire Women on Facebook, you can just through Messenger send me a message. Let's face it, that's kind of the fast, easy way of the world these days. I'm happy to, again, share with any of you that reach out. Like I just do some complimentary consults with people, so that as I've come back, it's how do we help from this business money mindset, at all phases. And so that's why I'm just hallucinating or creating these 3 phases. But right now I see that they really fit, and there's some tools and actions that are free to each of you, at every one of those phases. So those are a couple of the fastest ways to just reach out and get a hold of me.
Awesome. I appreciate you. I appreciate you being on the show today. And speaking of associates, speaking of chiropractors selling their practice, if you are a chiropractor out there or an office manager out there, and your doc or you are looking to sell your practice, hire an associate, hire an independent contractor, whatever it might be, whatever chiropractic job advert that you have, hit me up. Head to postachiropracticjob.com/thelegendarychiropractor, or just postachiropracticjob.com. You'll get there either way, and post your chiropractic job advert with us today. Thank you, Dr. Janice, for being on this show. You are lovely as per usual, and I am sure it's 11 o'clock. We had a couple viewers hang on, and we got a lot of likes, a lot of comments, and so share this with your corner of the world, with To Inspire Women, because that program, like I said, chiropractors and students out there, if you're not following To Inspire Women, you better be. They're doing huge things, and I will actually see them at Chiro Sushi in end of June, at June 28th and 29th. So That is phenomenal. And thank you, Dr. Janice. Dr. Janice Hughes or Dr. Janice at toinspirewomen.com. And then Dr. Janice Hughes on Facebook Messenger. 2 best ways to get in touch with her. Reach out to her for a consult. Reach out to her for just any chiropractic or personal needs that you might have. So thank you, Doc. Have a wonderful afternoon today. And thanks for giving up some time to be on the show.
Bye now.
Bye.
Have a great day.
You too.